For 23 years, my next guest shared the love of Christ with the people of Izmir, Turkey. As pastor of Izmir, I'll get that out, Resurrection Church, many of you know his story. In 2016, Andrew Brunson was arrested and imprisoned for false charges of espionage in Turkey. And for nearly 2 years, he remained detained until October of 2018. After significant, I should say very significant pressure from the Trump administration and prayers literally from around the globe, he was released from prison. I was there for his last hearing, and upon his release, I accompanied him and his wife, Noreen, back to the States. Last year at the Values Voter Summit, we honored him on the 1 year to the date anniversary of his release with our Cost of Discipleship Award, and I have asked him to join us again to share what is on his heart for the nations and for our nation. I believe it is a message that the American church needs to hear. Andrew, welcome back to the Values Voter Summit.
Thank you, Tony. Very good to be here.
You know, this has been an interesting year. We've talked tonight just about some of the challenges we've faced with the coronavirus, the pandemic, the demonstrations, the lawlessness, the natural disasters. But this really has brought a unique focus onto the church. And I think in particular when you think about the threat to the freedom of worship in this country, you know, with your perspective of what you've seen, what you witnessed, what you participated in Turkey, but now being here in the United States and seeing what's unfolded in the last year, what are your observations?
When I look at the pressures that have come, especially with this corona time, and the fear that has gone throughout the states, and just the pressures in society, the economic pressures, there's just an increase in pressure, if I can use that word. I've used it several times. A friend compared it to swimming against a 1 mile an hour current. And that's difficult to do. But what I have sensed is that this is preparation for us as believers, as a church, that we are to prepare and learn how to stand in these difficult times of pressure, because greater pressures are coming. So I think that as my friend described it this way, the 1 mile an hour current is going to become a 5 mile an hour current, and it may become a 10 mile an hour current, just that the pressures are going to increase. And one of those pressures, I think, is going to be hostility, growing hostility toward people who follow Jesus Christ. And we're already seeing that in many corporations, the academic world, the media classes, entertainment classes, that there's an increasing hostility toward people who identify clearly with Jesus Christ. So my concern, you know, for 25 years I was focused on the Muslim world. And now coming back to the States for the first time in my life, I just have a real urgency for the United States, for the next generation, I think, of my children and the pressures they're going to face. One of the reasons that I'm really concerned is because when pressures come, if we're not ready for them, you're a Marine, and Marines are trained not to run away when they're under pressure. But there's training that goes on. You're trained rigorously so that you can exercise discipline and not run when there is fear and when there's pressure. And I think that many people in the States, in the church especially, were not ready to face the pressures that are coming. And the danger is that then when the pressure rises, if we are not ready, then we will run when we're afraid. And I know about fear because I was very afraid during my time in prison. And the natural thing to do is run away. And so my concern now is that we as a church need to prepare for difficult times. I know that many people associate me with persecution because of what I went through. I'm actually, Noreen and I are the third generation in our family that has faced persecution, because Noreen comes from a Hungarian background, and her family, 2 generations, suffered under communism because of their faith. And so this is actually something that's normal, and Jesus warned that persecution would come. Anyone who wants to live a godly life, Jesus said, will be persecuted. And people hated Jesus even though he was loving and kind and compassionate, and he said that the world will also hate his followers because we carry his scent. And so persecution, we have not experienced it at a high level in the United States, I think because of generations before us who honored God. And even though our country, obviously we had many sins and failures as a country, but there were many people honoring God, and especially at a leadership level. And the result of that is that God blessed our country. Now that is changing because, the Judeo-Christian values that were so emphasized, many people no longer teach those or hold those. And our culture, we're always one generation away from losing our values and our culture. And we see that happening now. And so there are going to be increasing pressures.
When you say that, I immediately, the thought, the title of the book, The Cost of Discipleship. There is a cost to following Jesus Christ. And I don't know that we've necessarily taught believers in Christ, that those that come to faith in Christ, that there is a price. Jesus said, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. As you're talking about this, I agree with you. As I look back on the last 6 months and the church's response to the coronavirus, I've seen, in many cases, a church that's been riddled with fear. So what is the way forward? What must we do to prepare for those increasing pressures?
So I think the first thing is that we need to be aware that it can happen, and that for much of the world, they have faced these pressures before. They have faced hostility because of their faith. We haven't because of what we just mentioned, our heritage, but it's coming. So the first step is be aware that it can happen, because if you know that the pressures will increase, then you can prepare ahead of time and develop that discipline so that when you're afraid, you do not run away. The second thing I think is the most important thing that Jesus underlined. He said the most important thing that we can do as believers is to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And this is what will fuel perseverance in difficult times. If we focus on loving God, then we are more willing to suffer for one that we love. And so I think that it was my pursuit of loving God and developing intimacy with Him over a period of years that prepared me for the pressures that I faced in prison. Because God knew that it would be difficult, that I'd come close to the point of failure, but He also knew that because of that pursuit of Him, because I ran after His heart, that I would not turn away from Him in times of in the end. I would be faithful to Him. And another thing is having the right perspective, and this is something we can cultivate, is that who are you going to fear more? Are you going to fear the rage of the Twitter mob? And some serious things can come. When there's hostility, we can suffer consequences. But are we going to be more afraid of the rage of the Twitter mob or of standing before God? Will we fear more the consequences of obeying God, which will be persecution, or the consequences of not obeying God? And so we need to cultivate the right perspective. What I do when I get up in the morning, I try to start my day this way, to say, Jesus, I want to live today for the day that I stand before you. I want to live in such a way that when I stand before you, I will not be ashamed.
That's good. And I think we need to be teaching those same things and challenging our children to do the same and prepare their generation, because while we don't want it to happen, you're absolutely right. We need to be aware that it can, and the signs are out there.
Can I say one more thing, Tony?
You
I don't want this can sound very heavy and discouraging, and I don't want it to be that way, because I love what the prophet Daniel says, and he talks about people who will live in the most difficult times. He says that those who know their God will stand and take action. And so, yes, there are pressures coming and we can't escape them, but God also has assignments for us in the midst of that. I think we're going to see two parallel things: the increase of darkness, but also the increase of light. And we are the children of light.
And that sums up what we're all about here this year at the Value Voters Summit. America, it's time to pray. It's time to vote, which means we engage, and it is time to stand for those truths. Andrew Brunson, always great to see you.
Thank you.
And folks, look, it's reality. We need to pray, we need to vote, we need to stand for those truths no matter what. No matter how big the Twitter mob may be, we need to stand, I would say, without fear, fearless, because of the one whom we serve. And I want to challenge you, take the challenge. Pray, vote, and stand.